entirety of womanhood is strung within the gaps of man's ribs. Eve, the woman of eternal wronghood. Eve was the first woman we laid blame on, who reached high enough to make God tremble, damned to be made from something just less than the heart of man. She was plucked from her husband's ribs and built like clay to become the perfect woman, silent, complacent, a companion for man. When Eve was built from bone, she was called Isha, or of man. Only once she left the garden was she allowed the privilege of a true name. We are taught that she was taken not from the foot, or the head, or the heart, but from something man had in excess. The creation of Eve could not inconvenience man, of course. She was only there to better his life. Eve was told that only through disobedience would she find wisdom. Eve, although made for the benefit of man, knew her worth lay higher than just his rib. So she reached up and wrapped her fingers around wisdom's shiny red skin. With every bite, she stole her life back. And then we all know the story. Woman gets too curious, becomes too much of a person, too much of an equal. And so they fold her into their chest cavity, a place they feel more comfortable with her being. Eve is exiled and doomed to experience a life of pain, forever ruled by her husband. Every woman who comes after, her guilt-ridden descendants. The story of creation is built upon women being less than men. We see these trends in the stories we tell of women today. Falsely constructed tales attempting to define the limits of a woman's potential. We call them crazy girlfriends. Deranged wives, jealous lovers, desperate for fame, we cage them in the frames of their relationships. And so we are left thinking that to be outspoken is to deafen, to be bright is to blind. As I grew up and saw repeated stories tearing down every woman role model I grew to love, I recognized the posturing women are forced into. I began to redefine what I wanted my role models to look like. I looked for the fallen soldiers of society's war on women, and there I found Yoko Ono. Her parents named her Ocean Child, a fitting name because the first decade of her life was spent traveling across oceans and living between major U.S. cities and her native country, Japan. During World War II, America, a country she spent half her life living in, showered Tokyo with bombs. As her city went up in flames, Yoko's mother piled her family's belongings and lives into a wheelbarrow and pulled them away from the wreckage into the sanctuary of a small country town. Yoko Ono, however, has never done small. She sailed to New York, where her concoction of conceptual and performance art inevitably led to her being intertwined with the Fluxus art movement, a blossoming community she helped cultivate by sharing her apartment studio as a performance space. Her most famous pieces were her innovative instructional pieces. Sometimes she would sit on the floor of an art museum and instruct viewers to cut her clothes off. Or she would place nails through a piece of plywood with instructions to punch them in with a hammer. In 1966, her art was being exhibited in London. It was there that she met John Lennon. Lennon was dissatisfied with the pessimism he saw in every sculpture until he encountered a ladder. He decided to climb up and peer through the attached eyepiece. Inside, Yoko had painted a single word: yes. She was alive before she met John Lennon. She lived before she met John Lennon. John Lennon did not breathe Yoko into existence. She carved her pathway through a war-ridden world, through a psyche of drug abuse and mental illness and a yearning to create. Yoko is not inspiring because she did everything right. She is inspiring because she built her life truthfully and authentically and creatively. During their relationship, Yoko grew into political activism. She and Lennon interwove their lives and built their couplehood on protests for world peace, organizing and betting during their honeymoon to protest the Vietnam War, creating and participating in various public protests for peace, and publishing numerous protest songs together. Yoko had her life story ripped from her and twisted into newspaper headlines. They broadcast her as nothing more than the person who broke up the Beatles. Her life merely a plot line for their breakup, as her career, art, life, and history was forced into the confines of her relationship with John Lennon. reflection of what we expect to see in a woman. We smeared Yoko in colors that painted her as the adulterer who tore apart the Beatles, the woman responsible for ruining John Lennon's career, a convenient scapegoat for our modern-day creations. Eve found knowledge hinged on an apple. Yoko found love and adventure carved into the word yes. Women who were unafraid to reach up and grab the sky and pull it down to themselves, who painted themselves new names, tore up limitations, we tore them down with misplaced blame. We blame Eve but not the snake. We blame Yoko but not the Beatles. We blame victims but not the perpetrators. Color women and misnomers, they are not victims, they are the villains of their own story. Cackling witches, vicious bitches named infamy, we made them unseen in our blame. After her husband's assassination, Yoko's vibrant life continued to grow. She's released numerous experimental films, albums, books, created performance art pieces and sculptures, and curated museum exhibits, and received honorary doctorates, and protested, and performed, and spoke out, and persevered as newspapers labeled her untalented, fake, the whore who broke up the Beatles, even if every single member has denied it, a modern-day Eve who saw a path for herself, but was blamed for a man's moral lapses and Snake's manipulations. Yoko wears her resilience well. She wears it in her hands and the crooks of her arms. Her wrists have seen hospital bracelets from extended stays in mental institutions. Her fingers are ringed with a history of failed marriages. Her arms were left empty after her daughter Kyoko was lost in the crossfire of a custody battle. She didn't see her daughter for 16 years. Yoko is 83 years old now and is releasing a biopic about her and Lennon and their protesting. Yoko's life has been about stealing back the narrative, stealing a life our society never wanted her to have. As with everything Yoko does, there will be backlash. But after years of carrying sexism and racism on her shoulders, she will scoop the words off her back and pile them into a wheelbarrow. She will push her burden through the worn-down war zone of America and its politics, and she will bury them in the graveyard she buried her husband in the graveyard so many people wanted her to be in instead of him. The people who valued her less than her husband, who want women to take up less space, make less noise, who don't take her art seriously, who don't take her life seriously. As a society, we are so ready to see women as less than human. We construct their public image with stereotypes and concealed prejudice and ignore their humanity by dehumanizing their womanhood. Force them to create shelter under the guise of anonymity or fake names, because when women achieve something instead of praise, they're met with criticism, or hatred, or body-shaming comments, or objectification, or reminders of the place of the kitchen or garden society tells them to stay in, to stand still with a closed mouth, to do the work no one thinks about, because no one wants to think about women. No one wants to think about women if they're not white, or straight, or thin, or are thin in the wrong places, or don't fit society's definition of womanhood. And then those people will turn to their daughters, and will tell them they're special, that they're strong, that they could be the president one day, and one day they will be. Because women are used to being bent with struggle, are used to feeling blame hung on them like bombs hanging above a skyline, like apples hanging in trees, because one day forbidden trees won't be forbidden. And women will eat apples and win presidencies and be allowed to be real people, be allowed to be women with no strings attached. I want those daughters to know that their bodies are boundless. Their hands hold potential before anything else. My sister will be turning 6 in 2 days. Today, I see her squirm out of skirts and play Ninja Turtles in dress-up gowns. I see childhood's eclectics move through gender's limitations. I see the world she cradles in her eyes. And most clearly, I see myself. I see the pathway of realizations mapped out ahead of her, just as it was for me, and I wonder who she'll be inspired by. Whether she will pick apart false headlines to find authentic womanhood, or if by the time she gets to be my age, she won't have to. When I was her age, I found it in fiction. At night, I would rest my eyes when my father's voice carried me away to stories about the smartest witch at Hogwarts. In those stories, being a witch was a good thing. Being a bitch meant having a backbone. And in the morning, I would wake up and wonder why powerful women were never real. I went to bed on November 9th after watching Wisconsin turn red. I had spent the night with loud, slurring women standing on chairs to get a better view of the TV screen, excited at the prospect of the next 4 years, a symbolic victory for women. And I went to bed. And I heard my dad's voice reading out Nate Silver's predictions on the likelihood of a female president, and I thought about Hillary, and how she was blamed for her husband's adultery, and how she would be blamed for Trump's election, and how Trump's words were always twice as loud as her own. How girls across the world would view this as proof of their inabilities, and how Eve was punished for ambition. And then I think about Yoko, and how she screams just because she can, because her words are never listened to enough to label her anything but crazy. And I think about graveyards, and what Yoko's gravestone will say one day, what they'll write her legacy as, what they'll decide to call her: ocean child who swam upstream, woman who wore struggle in aged skin, modern-day Eve who built her own ribs, artist, wife, whore, ignored, infamous, and unseen.